Rachel Pedreschi is an experienced pre-sales leader in the analytics space. She's been involved in analytics since the days of data warehousing. She's seen that give way to Hadoop and then the modern cloud-based data lake and data warehouse, all the way up to the current era of real-time analytics. Rachel and I have known each other for a while, and I had a great time today talking to her about that history and the factors that have gotten us to the world of real-time analytics that we're in today. Let's listen in. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Real-Time Analytics Podcast. I am your host, Tim Berglund, and I'm joined here in the literal studio by my friend, Rachel Pedreschi.
Hello.
Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I am thrilled to be here.
Thrilled to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You and I have been friends and sometime coworkers on and off for the past decade. I guess we haven't ever stopped being friends.
I guess that's a conversation on another podcast.
I think so. Maybe for after.
Yeah.
What are you up to these days?
What am I up to these days? You mean professionally or
yes.
About 5'4"?
What
okay,
do you?
Got it.
5'2", but
so I've recently taken a position with Decodable.
Excellent.
I'm going to be doing technical sales there. Really excited about getting more deeply into the streaming analytics, into the more of the ETL side of it, even though I'm not sure that saying ETL is allowed anymore.
Yeah, it's ETL with an asterisk. It's ETL, but not like that. So hardly surprised that you're doing pre-sales. That is, I think, the sort of defining passion and competency of your life. You are very, very good at that.
What I do.
It really is. Tell us about Decodable. They're something to do with stream processing for the uninitiated. What do they do?
So, mind you, I'm pretty new, so I will give it my best shot. But Decodable offers a hosted platform for Kafka, Flink, and Debezium, which we can talk about each one of those individual projects separately. But together, what we hope to be is the ETL for streaming data, the snowflake for ETL for streaming data.
Gotcha. The snowflake of streams.
Snowflake, well, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess it comes down to is I spent about 4 years working with Druid. And one of the primary concerns that people had when they were dealing with Druid was getting their data model right and getting their data prepped and getting into Druid correctly. So this issue of data into a database for analytics has been around for a while.
Yeah. It's kind of I'm stuck on a thought. Streaming, the snowflake of streaming, Glacier comes to mind because that's like streaming ice. But number one, it's taken. Number two, absolutely terrible name, so don't use it.
Terrible name, very slow.
Anyway,
we're trying to be the opposite of that. Maybe like the lava versus the glacier.
I know. It just so we workshop. This is why I don't do this. I would be in product marketing if I were any good at naming things. So that's where you are now. But
yes.
Actually, what I want to talk to you about is where you've been. So, and it's a delicate thing to say. You've been in this business for a while now. Don't take that the wrong way. But
you're still older than me.
I, in fact, am by a few years. Would we even have been in high school at the same time? Or maybe you'd have been a freshman when I was a senior.
Still matters.
Beneath contempt.
You can say that I'm old, but you're still older.
I am older, so that is a very fair observation.
Right.
But that gives you some perspective, and that's kind of what I want to talk to you. You've been in the real-time analytics world for a while now. I'm with StarTree. We have a slightly different, and I think quite complementary approach to things compared to Decodable. Slightly different parts of the stack.
Yep.
But you've seen this whole thing evolve from before streaming was anything approaching mainstream. I want your perspective on how we got here. And that can even just kind of be Rachel's story. So however you want to tell it. But let's begin somewhere, obviously not too far back, because, I mean, you wouldn't go too far back. You wouldn't, that
like
would be before your time.
like stone into we counted all the grain.
Cuneiform.
Yeah.
I mean, those were reports, but no, seriously, where does professional analytics life begin for you, and kind of play the clock forward. Let's just spend a few minutes talking about that.
All right. So back in the 90s, little Rachel got her first job at a startup, and that startup was called RedBrick. And RedBrick was one
Maybe you heard of it.
Maybe you heard of it. Maybe you have. If you have, you're probably Tim and I's age. RedBrick was the first database built for data warehousing, and it was a Ralph Kimball company, and they were proponents of something called a star index, which is sort of similar in structure, from what I can tell, to the
vaunted StarTree index.
StarTree
in
index.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now you just told everybody that our company name is an implementation detail that leaked into the interface. But go on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, back in RedBrick days, we computers were on one machine. Databases were on one machine.
Right.
I know, it was really strange, right? You had, you bought a Sun box or an HP box, and you installed a database, and you loaded it with data, and you did stuff to it. And the stuff that you did to it depended on the type of database and type of application. So there were things called OLTP applications. And so if you want to use the example of a grocery store, right? And you go through the checkout line and you scan something, and a little transaction goes into a database someplace, and eventually it spits you out a receipt.
Yeah.
It updates inventory somewhere, right?
There are exchanges of value and events happening out in the world, and we want to record those exchanges of value and events and mutations in the state of things in the world.
Exactly.
Transactions.
And most of those were important to making money for your business. So those databases that ran those were sort of sacrosanct. You didn't touch them. You just sort of left them do their thing. And somebody had a really good idea at one point. Hey, you know what? We might be able to ask that data some questions. And they started, running queries. And the first thing probably those first DBAs did said, whoa, you're going to bring down the system. We can't do that. And they're like, well, can you make a copy of this data and we can query it someplace else?
We can bring that one down. You won't be as worried. Yeah.
Yeah. And
you don't want production DBAs in your face.
Right, exactly. And in that moment, a multi-trillion-dollar industry was born, and we like to call it ETL. Extract the data out of a database, transform it into something that is more suitable for reporting, and then load it into a database that has been designed for asking questions.
There you go.
Right. And what I mean by designed for asking questions, instead of the database being optimized for very small reads and writes at a time and high throughput of those, being more tuned for large data. So scanning
a big set of some measurement, some value, and aggregating, doing something. Yeah. Optimized for scans rather than point reads, which is in tension with the way like caching is going to work between. They have to be separate systems. Just math.
Just math. Yeah. And it's amazing how many people still think we can take an OLTP database and we can run analytic queries on it.
It is, because it feels like, this is A is for Apple, right? But no.
No. It's, anyone who tells you differently is selling something. Anyway, so RedBrick was this first sort of database built for data warehousing. And we competed with a company, you might have heard of it, called Oracle.
I have.
Yeah. Oracle had a way of tuning their Oracle database to be more appropriate for analytic queries. But the problem still existed. You still had to take your data out of your transaction system and put it into an analytic system.
I remember being asked that question in the installer for 8i and not really knowing what it meant. I wish I could be the friend of young Tim and help him with that. Anyway, go on.
So that's where I started my career. And I remember during my interview, somebody asked me what an index was. And because these were telephone interviews, I could look up my little book in an index and actually look to see what an index was and then go find out and read about it and goes, oh, an index is exactly what I just used. I just did admit that I cheated on my first technical interview there.
Okay, well, water under the bridge.
That's right. Anyway, so from there, I ended up in pre-sales and kind of dabbled around that space because there was companies that were doing ETL for that. There was companies doing reporting. So worked with a company called Jaspersoft, which was one of the first open source reporting tools.
And you kind of had like a good 15 years of what I'll call incremental change in that space. The paradigm was successful and established and
making lots of people a lot of money.
Absolutely. And Open source started to encroach. Like you started to see the Talons and the Jaspers for open source ETL pipelines and open source reporting.
Greenplum.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, that's because open source, whole different story, orthogonal to this one, but it's happening at the same time.
Right.
But no fundamental change. You've got your transactional data, batch process, star schema, snowflake schema, reports, blah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it works.
It absolutely does. Yeah.
And
every time I talk about this, I make the point to say that was a revolutionary, transformative technology that deserved the success it had. So we kind of dump on it as old-fashioned now, but it was the sort of wild-eyed revolutionaries of 30 years ago who were trumpeting that revolution.
Well, I don't know why we dump on it as old-fashioned, because we're doing exactly the same thing today.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah. I don't know if you heard about it, but this thing called the internet started.
It did.
And I think we can thank Al Gore for that.
That's what I'm told.
Yeah, that's what I'm told. So Al Gore started the internet. And let's talk about transactional
right now,
databases.
There's an early career developer Googling that phrase. What does she mean Al Gore started the internet? That was... Anyway, I hope you've paused the playback and you're back with us now.
It's definitely meme worthy.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Anyway, right. So we go towards the internet. And if you are our age, we might remember things like pets.com and other early websites that when we were trying to order stuff, you remember like the little spinny thing that would happen, right? Well, while you waited, hopefully.
Yeah, it was rough days. Nobody knew how to do any of this. And the scale people were dealing with was unprecedented because this kind of really new network architecture that was now the front and the distribution for the same old application and analytics architecture. And those were kind of feeling pain.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so you have this single database on a single machine, and it's trying to handle unprecedented amounts of volume, right? You now are able to open up your transaction systems to basically the entire World Wide Web.
Yeah, a global audience, which, you used to distribute a CD or, the people inside the company got this installer for your Visual Basic app that hit the departmental database. I mean, that was the application architecture emerged for that kind of distribution model. And now suddenly everybody's got a web browser. So yeah.
Everybody does, right? And so we have an advent of new databases that came on the market. I call it the Cambrian explosion of databases.
Yes.
Because they needed to be able to handle the scale of these new applications. And so this is back to our world at DataStax when we worked with Cassandra, and there's other ones.
Former mutual employer.
That's how we met. And the concept behind it was distributing this system. And I think MySQL is one of the first databases that got to the point where you could distribute it across multiple machines. And that way you could also distribute the load, and you weren't just stuck with a single machine anymore.
Right.
You could use commodity hardware or, small little pizza boxes. Do you remember pizza boxes?
I do. This is a little post-pizza box, but I definitely remember pizza boxes. Always wanted one.
I don't know if it was because, you would just have racks and racks of this stuff and you would try to distribute your systems, right?
I was pizza box. I always think of like Sun thin client things, but no, you'd have single U commodity, blah, blah, blah.
Blah, blah, blah. Exactly.
Racks full of them. Yes.
Right. And so this seemed to work pretty well. And, we don't have to go into the details of how, these NoSQL OLTP databases evolved.
Mostly, what you're talking about now, still transactional technologies.
Yep.
Exchanges of value being recorded in the database, events, mutations in the state of entities out in the world, record them, keep track of them in this transactional database.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you have to make it nimble and able to be distributed globally. And, you don't ever want it to go down because
fault tolerant and
somebody might tweet about that.
Right. And that was really the kind of the impulse behind that movement. Not so much their analytics.
No, not at all. Because at the time, analytics was still, it really even is today. It's a cost center, right? It's a cost that a business does to run their business. And systems that make a company money are always going to get the first sort of push.
Yes. It'd be interesting. Sometime I need to get you and StarTree CRO in a conversation about that. It'd be a great conversation. Not for today, but yes, there's the flow of the business transactions, and then there's I need perspective on what has happened,
right?
So that I can understand what's going on in the business and make decisions.
Right.
That's the historical framing of analytics right there.
But one of the things that came out of this is that these systems became more complex, and there became more data, and there was actually more data to analyze, and being able to observe what was going on in these very complicated systems or web browsers or web technologies. And all of a sudden, companies became sort of inundated with too much data. But they had shouldn't we be analyzing this? Shouldn't we be doing something with this?
Yeah, this was in the heady days of people unironically saying big data, more is different. Maybe that's a Chris Anderson thing. I don't know. It sounds Chris Anderson-y. But, that there is more data doesn't mean that we just have more of what we had, but the moreness makes it some kind of a different force. And so shouldn't we be asking questions about it somehow? Yeah.
So you know what we should do with it? We should distribute it, just like we did with OLTP applications. It sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give 15 years ago us that. You kind of had to.
Well, you had to, but that got expensive.
Mm-hmm.
We can say disk is cheap, but still disk isn't that cheap.
Disks are physical objects that have costs. Yeah.
But more importantly, that ETL thing that I talked about earlier,
mm-hmm.
that was still a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was still really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
I remember at one point reading that Gartner said that an enterprise data warehouse would take a company 18 to 24 months to create. And most of that time would be in ETL work. And when I actually did work for a living and built out data warehouses, I had 32 different data sources, and it took me 10 months to integrate 32 fairly small, not streaming, not complicated,
mm-hmm.
basically access databases
mm-hmm.
that I had to integrate.
Yes.
So ETL was still hard, still expensive, but still necessary in order to do really good analytics. But hey, let's just not do that and just throw all the data into cheap storage and see what happens. I mean, I don't want to denigrate any technologies because every technology is beautiful.
On its own.
In its
own terms. And particularly historical ones. We're all doing the best we can at the time.
Right.
But
some of those paradigms of just throwing all the data into some place in a distributed system, cheap storage, and talking to it in a language that might not have been SQL, which is what analysts typically used, seemed to become the thing that people wanted to do.
This is Rachel doesn't love MapReduce.
Rachel doesn't love MapReduce, right?
Or Hadoop.
Hadoop. Yeah. But it was the genesis of some really good ideas. And so I think we have another parallel path that's going on too,
mm-hmm.
right?
So you have transactional data, the NoSQL revolution, that's exploding, all this innovation and exploration over here. The fundamental thing being that now where everybody's a distributed systems developer, in parallel analytics, still kind of the ETL life, but instead of the star schema place, it's now, nobody says data lake at this point in history, but it's data lake.
Right. And we call it ELT. So throw it all in and then decide how you want to. Figure it out
later. Yeah, schema on read, it's fine.
Exactly. Versus schema on write. That's one of my favorite paradigms to talk about. Yeah.
And again, these things are hard. So we kind of look back and see that didn't really work out. But at the time, I certainly found that to be a compelling possibility.
And it was. Yeah. It made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Also, this cloud thing happened.
Yes, was happening at the time.
Yes.
AWS was a thing. You had S3, EC2 were a few years old, and they were innovating with other services on top of that. It wasn't the like restaurants that have a 60-page menu and you just kind of look at it and you freeze. I can't pick anything.
Right.
Can you just be like Qdoba where there's these little mix and match, right? AWS is like that now. It wasn't then, but the cloud was a thing.
Cloud was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was vendors that came out that were like, hey, you know what? You should be doing data warehousing without having to think about your infrastructure. You don't have to think about whether or not it's distributed or not. Don't have to think about the pizza boxes. You know what? You just do you. You just put some data into a database and we'll handle the rest and you can just query it to your heart's content.
Mm-hmm.
So we have two parallel tracks going on, right? You've got sort of the big data, Hadoop, lots of data in a single place. And then we also have cloud sort of happening. Right. And so I think those two together created a kind of a much valuation in the Silicon Valley, right?
Yes.
Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery, all of those kind of cloud data warehouses.
Getting into fairly recent history at this point.
Yeah, we're not too far off, right?
And is it fair? Don't let me be, Svengali and put words into your mouth here. But for you as an observer, I mean, you have spent a little bit of time in the transactional world, but really analytics has been your home for your career.
Yes, it has been,
Yes. You are the mistress of pre-sales organizations. The specific technology domain is analytics. And in your experience, so I'm listening to you and in my own thinking about this, there was this revolution in the early 90s, the Kimball Inman data warehouse thing, very specific. And like now you have to look up, like, what was the difference between the two? There were kind of its own religious war. But from here, you're like, oh, totally can't tell. You guys look the same. Right. But specific plans, tool sets, ideas for how to get from there to here and do your analytics. And you might say, well, the grandchildren of Hadoop running on your data lake in S3 or just Snowflake or whatever, that looks very different. But I think paradigmatically, that's not.
Is that a word?
It is. It's an incredibly pretentious one, and I already regret saying it.
We're not saying it well.
It's like I didn't even say it.
Okay, gosh.
I said it so poorly. In terms of the basic shape of the thing, got data in my transactional system. I'm putting it here, and now I'm asking questions. Come on, guys. And it's not that having a separate database is some kind of moral failing, because I think we referred earlier to math and vaguely some things about caches, and I didn't say power law versus normal distribution, but those are all concepts that actually govern the reasons why you probably can't do transactions and analytics in the same place. Those things still hold. It's not like the moving from one place to another is somehow bad, but I don't know that we're doing things very differently yet. They're bigger tool sets, they're cloudier tool sets, but it feels like the paradigm is still a batch paradigm that is shaped like business was shaped when I was in college. And here we are in a very different world.
We are.
And seems like a cliche, but mobile devices and always on connectivity everywhere. I probably have AirPods in my ears that are announcing things into my ears. It's not enough that the device in my pocket wiggles when something happens in the world. And all the analytics you've worked with in your career until recently were for the old world. So for you being the guest, that's me talking a lot. Is that fair?
I would say that's very fair.
Okay.
You just set me up. Just whoops, spike, right? That's exactly where I was going with this, right? Is that we have a very nice modern infrastructure now for distributed or cloud-based data warehouses. We also have the option to be doing analytics on data lakes themselves. The data, or the what we used to call a DBA, has lots of options now when it comes to choosing where they want to put their batch data.
Yeah.
But I don't know. You worked at this company. I don't know what it's called. It starts with a C.
I was at Confluent, and we were talking about events and Kafka and real-time things, and that whole event-driven revolution, which I see as fundamentally a revolution in application architecture, is a very real thing. It is happening. It, in some places, has happened and is really still unfolding, and I think is a paradigm for the next 30 years. I like to say I think there are people who are right now learning how to eat food who will be leading development projects somewhat into their careers that are still based on that same paradigm.
For sure. And from the way I look at it, because as you said, kind of taking a step back and looking at the market, to me it looks like ETL, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I know Kafka does more than that, but there's definitely an ETL portion.
Make this real time. Where this is the Real-Time Analytics podcast.
Right.
You are an early guest on this fledgling real-time analytics podcast. Take us home with how does that enter the picture, and what's the fundamental change there, and what do we look forward to then?
Well, because now Kafka is becoming more and more ubiquitous, and it is actually probably one of the best versions of ETL, because you now have to have your data in hundreds, potentially tens of different databases that are all designed to do very different things. And you want that data to be like bread, right? You want it to be fresh, and you want it to be fast, and you want it to be slathered with butter. Oh, no, wait.
No, that's actual bread.
Oh, right. All right.
Yeah.
And so any type of system that requires that type of freshness of data still needs to be doing analytics. So observability, IoT, user ad tech, user analytics. All of those are applications that require data to be streaming into it. And we have a new generation of databases that have grown up around that to be able to handle these, like exactly what semantics and other types of streaming concepts that have become so important, and give end users the ability to see their data in not just batch, but also in real time, or even the combination of the two.
Gotcha. So, and again, I'll put words in your mouth, but tell me if they're the wrong words.
That's wrong.
No, we've got a new need for kind of a new class of database, given this streaming event-driven world that's gotten away from we'll just call it the old client-server paradigm. Now you've got a bunch of little services talking to each other through streams, and the consumer expectation that everything be instant. Well, Hadoop's grandchildren don't do that.
Right.
They really are built for the requirements, and built well for the requirements of the previous generation. And now you need databases that can ingest events at high speed, make them queryable, and are engineered. They're still distributed, like all the lessons we've learned the last 15 years and the expertise we've built as an engineering community around distributed databases. Very thankful for all those lessons, because that's life now. But now you've got things oriented for deeply sub-second query times on large data sets and interesting index types and streaming ingest and all that, which just is hard to retrofit to that previous generation.
Yeah. And so this paradigm of Kafka, Flink, Pinot,
yes,
you just see over and over and over again to be able to handle these types of applications.
Yes. Now, I think we're kind of at time, and it would be interesting next time you're on, presumptive close, to talk about the Flink versus Pinot kind of dichotomy. Let's tee that up for a future episode, because
sounds good.
There really are times when you want, even for properly analytical queries, analytics analysis, that's redundant, but actual analysis you're doing on streaming data, there are times that job should be located in Flink. There are times when that should be a SQL query issued against Pinot, and I wonder what the criteria are. That'd be fascinating to talk about sometime.
Ooh, we could talk about state and stateless applications. Ooh, so much we could do there.
A lot. There's this blog post I'm trying to write about that. It just doesn't happen. Anyway, my guest today has been Rachel Pedreschi. Rachel, thanks for being a part of the RealTime Analytics podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And there you have it. The RealTime Analytics Summit is coming up on April 25th and 26th, 2023 in downtown San Francisco. You can register at rtasummit.com, and if you use the promo code PODCAST30, that's PODCAST30, you get 30% off your registration. I really hope to see you there. And hey, if you feel compelled to help us spread the word more and grow the real-time analytics community, you can give this podcast a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever fine podcasts are sold. If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel and, of course, hit that notification bell. And hey, you can always share your favorite episodes on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever it is you do social media. I look forward to talking to you again in the next episode.